Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Friday Focus. Thank you for joining us again. This is the summer of 2026, so we are recording 2 or 3 episodes so that we can take a break and so my team can have a break over the summer. So these are recorded versions of the podcast. Please, though, do still join the conversation, get involved in the conversations that we're having. We've just celebrated our 2-year anniversary. You know, we did our 50th episode a few episodes ago. We are ramping up to the autumn term, where we've got lots of exciting guests coming to join us, and I'm sure you'll love the conversations. There's so much going on in the education world at this point across the globe. People looking at what makes a curriculum, what makes the journey for our young people, readying them for their futures. So today I've invited a guest to come and talk in this kind of a world of reimagining education. And I know where we stand at the moment, there are lots of questions being asked about what should be in and what shouldn't be in. What are we preparing our young people for? So I'm going to welcome to the stage my guest today, Richard Dunn. Richard's from the Harmony Project, and we are going to be working together in the autumn at a conference which we'll give you more detail around later. But welcome, Richard. Thank you for joining us this morning to the Friday Focus podcast. Just introduce yourself and tell us a bit of your journey, your involvement in the education world and what you're doing now.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be with you. So a little bit of my story. I'm a former state school head teacher, deputy, and then head teacher for 18 years. And I now am founder and director of an education charity called the Harmony Project. So we work with schools in the UK and indeed in other parts of the world to reframe learning around nature, sustainability, and I think more than anything, trying to bring education to life, to make it meaningful and relevant for our young people in the context of what you've just said. You know, where are we going and how do we best prepare them for the future that they are already inheriting? So
your journey was as a teacher and as you said, deputy and head teacher. So tell us a little bit about that. So where were you in the country, and what was it? You know, what were the schools like that you were in?
So I live just southwest of London, near to Kingston, and really most of my teaching career, pretty well all of it, has been in this area. And it's been really interesting. I think I started out as teachers do, you know, working within the system and doing what was required. And I think as I grew through that system, started to question how we can really prepare our children for the future that we're talking a lot about right now, you know, around issues of sustainability, the climate crisis, biodiversity loss, and so on. And then on the other side, you know, the big world of digital AI and what that's going to do to education and our children's future and their lives.
I mean, they're big topics, aren't they? They're big themes that you're talking about. So look, we titled this episode "Putting Nature and Sustainability at the Heart of Learning." Now, there's lots of people that would be advocating for lots of things that would be at the heart of learning. You know, people will say oracy, literacy, numeracy. You know, so in a sense, make the case. You've led school. You know, like me, you've worked to inspire a group of teachers to kind of hold the purpose of what we're doing. So, you know, in a sense, make your case for why this big view. I mean, where you worked near the city, that's quite a challenge.
Yes, it is. And I mean, it's a really good question to be asking because, of course, we're very much all involved in a standards agenda. You know, schools are accountable for the standards in core learning, in reading, writing, maths in primary schools, which is my background. And that's absolutely fine. We need our children to be literate and numerate, and there's no question about that, and articulate too. But I think alongside that, we need to look at what we are learning for. And from my side, I was increasingly aware that we need to theme learning. We needed to bring learning together more to make it more interdisciplinary, more coherent. And I think if I have a concern still, it is that we're very dictated by schemes, by PowerPoints, by worksheets. And that's okay to an extent, but I think we need to balance that with the message of the Harmony Project's work, which is to try and take learning beyond that. So we're working with schools to just shift their practice so that they're more based in nature. And that can be their school grounds or a local area. It doesn't need to be anything too far afield, but just to really connect them to the outdoor world. For some children, that's really important because it helps them to self-regulate, to be calmer, to actually enjoy learning more in many cases. Yeah. And then from that into the sustainability agenda, so schools may be thinking about sustainable development goals, but how can you thread that through rather than seeing it as a one-off event or even something that's with a group of children, for example, with an eco club? So it's trying to bring that agenda into the mainstream of the learning.
And there's no doubt, I mean, we're not going to get into climate change and climate change deniers and so, all of that. Well, that we'll leave that to one side. There is no doubt that the groups like Learning Outside the Classroom, the ethics of outside first, there are and sort of system building where there's a space that people can share that's outside. We've got lots of forest schools. We've talked to people that are kind of advocating for those elements. What you're advocating is kind of bringing all of that together as a priority, and the essence of why. But I love that, so the purpose behind what we're doing rather than just, as you said, a bolt-on.
Yes, it is that. And I think actually what we're seeing is the need to help schools and maybe individual teachers to make that transition. It's often a confidence thing. If you've been very used to delivering learning in a classroom context, then taking it beyond can be a bit scary, and understandably so. So it's really trying to work alongside those schools and those teachers to say, let's look at what you're doing and let's give you opportunities to take that learning beyond a classroom base, for example, and to give them resources to help them with that. And I think what we've seen is that, there's some great stuff out there. There's some great resources out there, but it's the hand-holding element, the support with those individuals that really makes the difference.
Yeah. So Richard, from your background, just tell us a bit about where this came from, the Harmony Project. You've talked to me about it, but just go. Where did it come from? What was the instigator and the kind of the spark, the light bulb moment, the thought that led you into this?
Well, I think there were three stages to it. The first is in my own childhood, I grew up with a very academic education. And if I'm honest, that was fine to an extent, but it didn't really resonate with me. I wasn't inspired by that. But what I was inspired by was my time in nature, locally where I grew up, on holidays, maybe up in the Yorkshire Dales or down in Cornwall, exploring rock pools, that world that many of us will have experienced in our childhood. And, that was very, I think, deep in me, that sense of connection to the natural world. And then when I became a head, I had a particular trip that transformed my own understanding of what we are talking about, which was to go to Antarctica to set up an education-based run on renewable energy. And I came back and I thought, gosh, our children are not really engaged in this world. So their learning is not addressing these issues. Yeah. So I asked our year 6 children we had an energy monitoring system, which was being promoted, ironically, at another local school. But we took that on and I asked them to start to monitor our energy use, linking energy use to climate and the climate change. And they loved it. They loved the empowerment of leading on that initiative. And it wasn't a one-off, it was an ongoing agenda. So they were doing it week on week, sharing data, setting targets, rewarding success. And it started to build a really lovely sense of community around addressing a big issue in a very practical way in school. And then a parent said to me, can we do food? And we had an average school site. It wasn't particularly big, but we started to grow food in raised beds and then round the edge of the field where we had our playing areas. And then I thought, we need to bring this into the curriculum. How can we bring these sustainability messages into each half term of learning? So that was really the second stage. And then the harmony element came when I read a book written by the now King, when he was Prince of Wales, called Harmony, A New Way of Looking at Our World. And I read it and it changed my life, if I'm honest. I just thought, gosh, he's explaining a way of understanding our relationship to the world, to nature, which I haven't really heard before. It's deep in tradition. It's deep in indigenous culture and so on. And it just really touched me. And I thought, now we need to see how these principles of harmony can help us with a sustainable way of learning to live.
I mean, there's so much in what you just said that kind of resonates with things that I've seen and been involved with around the country. So the opportunity that's there, the just simply the practicality of what you've just described. Actually getting children involved in the real world, in growing things. We were working with a school in Norfolk where the children were disengaged with school, were not attending. And there were a number of things that we did with them. But one of the things that was quite striking, I was taken into a year 7, so it was a secondary school, into a year 7 food lesson. And the teacher said to me, the children have grown the herbs. So they were making a pasta salad, with tomatoes and herbs. They said the children, they were so enthusiastic and chatting and talking about it, but they'd grown their own herbs. So the chives and the basil and they were things that they'd grown with their own hands. And they said so proudly when we were working with them, one, there were 100% of the children in the classroom because it was a marked event. It was something. So it's that I hear so much of this, the drive to academic success, the drive to performance tables and so on. So we've got to get literacy and numeracy up. We need oracy experiences. Yes, we do. But to me, what motivates the children to do that? And I guess, Richard, you touched on that, an academic background is great. It's important. And we want a high quality education, but we actually need to motivate children to want it too. And that sounds to me that what you're kind of alluding to, that, get that engagement.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to see it as not an either or, that we can actually potentially get the best outcomes and the best learning and maybe even the best results by applying our learning in meaningful ways. And, what a lovely example you've just shared, that if children actually grow food and then use that food that they have grown in making a recipe that's seasonal, incredibly local, because it's literally outside their classroom. Yeah. I mean, that's such a lovely thing. And, what a vision it would be if we could get every child to be a grower who knows the meaning of planting seeds and seeing plants and food grow from that. So we have some really lovely examples, and I think that's important to state, that it's not starting from scratch. We're building on what's already out there. We've got great organizations that support this, but I think it is about finding that better balance between the academic and the classroom based, and then the applied that goes beyond that into whatever context that is locally.
Yeah. So as an educationalist, let's take that bigger picture. So we'll come to some of those examples, if I may, just draw them out of you, just so that people can kind of get a handle. Those that are listening want to. So what did you do? I've given one example of what we were involved in. At the kind of bigger end, that so you're working with schools, you're working with them to embed this kind of thinking. Who is it that's coming to you? Where are we seeing this kind of impetus to change?
Well, we're in an interesting time right now, aren't we? Because we have a new curriculum coming, and we think it's going to be in September 2028. And no doubt we'll have some kind of draft in a year or so's time. And schools will start to explore that and maybe play with it a little bit before it becomes statutory. I think, therefore, it means that schools are a little bit in limbo. They're not wanting to do too much. They're not wanting to change too much because, understandably, you don't want to put in a load of work if you're not sure what it's going to look like in 2028. So I think I see an element of reservation about getting too involved, but where it's happening best, I think, is where we're working with schools just to do that shift into more nature-based learning. So we're saying, take your current curriculum and reframe it. And for us, the key is to be flexible. So as an example, schools may have a science curriculum that they've been using for a while. And we would say, well, you keep going with that science curriculum, but have a look at our resources, which are very much trying to take that learning beyond the classroom into some kind of nature local context. And if you like 1, 2, 3 of those lessons, just slot them in. They'll be covering the same national curriculum requirements, the same areas of learning, but it's just doing it in a different way. So I think it's finding those opportunities to shift the focus and support schools with that. If I give you a wider context, I think in other places, and that could be, for example, special needs schools, independent schools, schools in other countries, where they may feel they've got a bit more autonomy to innovate and create without the concerns that we've just been highlighting. I think they can go much more deeply into it, and they might well take a whole school approach and through that reframe their learning around what we would call a harmony curriculum. And harmony really means joined or connected. So it's an ancient Greek word, which means that. And when we understand harmony, we understand how everything is connected. So we would encourage schools to be much more coherent and interdisciplinary around a theme or a project that they can then build the learning around. Now, some schools will do that to an extent. And we might say, if you took your curriculum, your morning time is your core skills, your afternoon time, you might have 1 or 2 afternoons where you're doing sport or other areas of learning. But if you took 3 afternoons and blocked your learning around this work in science, in geography, in art and design technology, in those kind of areas, maybe PSHE as well, then you can really start to glue the learning together. And it's really exciting then, actually, I think, for the teachers. It's an easier way to learn because you're joining together the dots around the same themes.
Yeah. I know, Richard, we're talking because we have the same values. Some of the schools that I've worked with, I know, have done exactly what you've just described. I mean, I won't name the school here, but the head will know if she's listening the process. But they have what they call the WOW curriculum or creative curriculum. Now, it's not the kind of Chris Quigley off the shelf creative curriculum. This is something they've designed. And actually, they've done exactly what you've just described. They will have their core literacy, numeracy, oracy. Actually, one of the things they asked me to do was actually, we'll create these creative projects, but can you make sure that we are centered around core skills, so that there's opportunity to write, there's opportunity to be numerate, there's opportunity to talk and express and use language. And it was a kind of let's be creative, but let's keep a center core. So it can be done, and and what you're saying is there's resources to achieve that. I really this idea of kind of the interoperability of learning, so looking for mapping, looking for how things support each other. It's not science for the sake of science, or it's not geography for the sake of geography. It's the world, and they join up, and there's no line between them. There's not a discipline of, well, yes, there are disciplines, and we understand it, but it's actually giving people the opportunity to join things together and make them relevant, and that's what we're about, isn't it?
It really is. And actually, it's just such a lovely way to learn, isn't it? And I remember a teacher saying to me that he had heard 2 year 4 children talking about the fact that their curriculum had changed, and they had noticed that things were starting to join up and connect together, and how wonderful it was that their teacher had done this. And it does make a lot of sense. And I think, as you've just said, it's that creative purpose. It's not just being creative, it's doing it for a reason. And whether we have a WOW elements to it, whether we have what we would call a great work or some kind of celebration of that learning, I think then children really know why they're learning. And it's often a question they'll ask, why are we doing it? And it gives them that answer. And the motivation behind that is great. I think the other thing I would say, Chris, is that I'm sensing now, and I speak with people who are maybe more global in their perspective, that they are now looking at this approach as being the model for the future. We know on one side the digital world is going to grow and there will be many benefits from that, but we have to manage that carefully. The other side that they're promoting is absolutely interdisciplinary, real life applied, nature connected, deeper and more meaningful. And some are even talking more about transdisciplinary, almost as you just said, rubbing out the lines and taking a theme or a project like food, like biodiversity, and then building the learning around that. So it feels like a really creative way in which we can build learning for our children for the 21st century. And of course, it needs to feed in some of these topical themes we're touching on, but in a very child-centered way. So they're not scared by them. They actually see them as exciting challenges to engage with.
I'm just going to pause for a moment, Richard, as we need to do the social media part. So just give me, I'll come back to that in a second, if I may. So thank you for being here. And I'm sure that you will have questions around the things that we're discussing. They're really important in terms of, what Richard's just said. Around the world, there are people that are looking at curriculum design, the content, but this idea of the kind of interrelationship is really key. And how do we make that happen? So we've gone through 30 years of siloed learning, and I think that's the thing that we need to challenge in this way forward. So here we have the opportunity to get involved in the conversation. You know that we are on LinkedIn. If you're watching here on LinkedIn, thank you for being here. We're on YouTube, growing audience there. Substack and Spotify, we've been broadcasting for some time. We are adding Facebook and Instagram. So Instagram, the Smart Curriculum Network, go and have a look, and then link to my profile on Facebook. There's some change within Meta in the way that they're working. So just go and find Chris Jones and you'll see me there. But we do value your comment, your involvement. So please do like, follow, subscribe, share, whatever it says on that particular platform. It's really important to us to grow this message. We know that this video itself is watched 2,500 times over the next couple of weeks. Once you've engaged with us, we know that we've got over 5,500 people engaging with the newsletter, the Smart Curriculum Network newsletter. So we thank you for your involvement, but please do share. We're going to be talking about these issues. We're going to be talking and highlighting how it can be done and how leadership in education can be impacted by these themes and these thoughts. So please get involved, like, follow, share, subscribe, and join the conversation. We appreciate you and value your input. So Richard, we're children are passing through the system. They're involved in this. Let's talk about some of the things that you've done with schools. So the people that have come to you, give us some examples of the things that have kind of landed and people have found really impactful.
Well, we have a number of projects running at the moment in this country, and they are, I suppose, giving schools different ways into this work. So our main project right now is called a Learning in Nature Research Program. So we're working with just under 90 schools nationally in urban, rural, suburban areas. So a real mix. And it's a research project. So we are absolutely asking them to evaluate what they're doing and to feed that into a portal. We have a university that's working with us, Christ Church, Canterbury, who are doing the evaluation of that. And we're saying to one class and one teacher, so we've started there, can you shift your learning in 3 of the half terms of your academic year into nature 2 hours a week? So that's an afternoon, or it's 2 sessions. You can choose the areas of focus, but we'll give you some ideas if you want them, particularly around, as I said earlier, the science. And we really want to see how you find it and how your children both learn and feel What is the experience for them? How are they feeling at the end of it? As we've touched on already, for some children, particularly more neurodiverse children, it's a really lovely way for them to learn. So there's always a bit of a barrier around that. You know, how do you get out of the classroom if you're very used to being in the classroom? And it may be that it's carousels or it's small groups initially, or it's half the class out for an hour and then swapping rounds. And we're very keen to encourage partnership. So if there are people in your community who are experts in a particular area of outdoor nature-based learning, then, you know, work with them. And there are so many great organizations who will do that. And see how you can do it. See where your challenges are, and let's just keep working out what is working and where the issues are that you may need some more support with. So we've just finished a Learning and Nature Research Program newsletter for the end of our first year of the trial. We've got a second year now coming up, and we'll track that class into its next year group. So they'll move with probably a new teacher into this second year of learning. And we're wanting to see how that can start to inform, or not start to, but feed into a conversation with people perhaps from the DFE, and we know people in the sustainability and climate change team, to see how that can help build this way of learning. I mean, we're working with a relatively small number of schools, but ultimately that could start to create a bit of a cultural shift. There are, as we've said, schools doing great things already. So that's one area of learning. Another area and another way in is we're working with the Sustainable Food Trust. We were talking about food just now. On food and farming learning experiences. So we have a network of regenerative, they're pretty well all organic farms working in harmony with nature. And we're taking children out onto those farms to understand the story of their food. So to really see, I mean, it's, as you say, it's so lovely to see it growing and growing it yourself on site, but actually to take them beyond that, to learn a bit more about where that food's coming from, and to really question the systems that are producing it. Our one word for that is health. So what does healthy soil look like? Plants, animals, people, planet. And it's a nice, easy message for children to get. So they're the kind of two big projects. Will run about 140 trips out to these farms this summer and autumn. And then I think on a more specific level, we'll work with an individual school, a little bit like you were just saying, to say, let's have a look at your curriculum and let's work out at its simplest level how you might thread that sustainability message, some of those SDG areas, into what you're doing. So if I give you an example, if we're looking at rivers, we might be looking at our local river rather than just rivers generically, and get children to really build an understanding of their local river from source to its final destination. It might be a tributary into a bigger river or going out into the sea. And then we might be looking at how healthy is that river. So we're starting to think about the health of our rivers, the issues around maybe sewage or industrial farming runoff that might be influencing that. We know a lot of our rivers are not healthy. And, you know, there's some really exciting projects building around that. There's a lovely project we're doing in South Wales with a group of 30 primary schools who are all doing a rivers project together with their community to, in effect, look at how they can bring their river back to life, because it's not in a good state right now. So that becomes incredibly purposeful. They can then exhibit their beautiful artwork around their river in a local community space. And suddenly their learning, which might have been colouring in and labelling a water cycle worksheet, is now really about their river and their place.
Richard,
so, yes, approaches.
I'd like to sort of centre on that river project. I know, because one of the things that I've been talking about with curriculum design is looking at three dimensions. We talk about character, creativity, and enterprise. Now, I don't mean enterprise in the classic school sense of businesses, but enterprise as in problem solving and action. And I've said to a number of schools that have got involved in the project, you know, children have great ideas. If you're not prepared to take those ideas and do something with them, then you'll turn off that creativity. So kind of that circle of idea. one of the groups that we've worked with are actually looking at real problems of flooding, so flooding in areas, and got the children to understand. So they're doing their geography, they're doing their science, but they're bringing it together around a real problem, a challenge in a community that's really impacting insurance and their homes, their safety, as you said, the health of the water and all those things. Now, these are real problems. Now, there's lots of voice in there, student voice. They can tell us what they think about the problems, and they're very astute young people. So it really is, as you've said in South Wales, get schools together, get children's minds on this, because these are the global citizens that we want to create. So that whole idea of character, creativity, and enterprise becomes a kind of a center around that thing. Now, I'm talking about what we're doing, but it's interesting that us as two education leaders in the system are doing something to really impact these schools. And I want to come on to a question of so where do leaders start? Because we've stepped out of the system and made something happen, and probably reaching more leaders and more children than ever we did in one institution. But if you're a leader in a school listening to this now, where do you start? How do you begin this journey? Because you can sit with frustration and you'll drive yourself mad, or you can do something. And you and I are kind of in that active doing something. We're not prepared to sit back. We've done something. So, Richard, in your domain, how do leaders start? What's the typical starting point? What do people say when they come to you? And we'll put your email up in a second. But what do they say when they come to you? How do they get involved?
So I think you just touched on a really important aspect of this work, which is the local context. Mm-hmm. And if we apply our learning to our local context, wherever that may be, an urban, rural environment, or somewhere in between, we will give it more meaning. Mm-hmm. And I think we can look at our curriculum, we can look at the areas of learning we're covering, as you've touched on, the science areas, the geography, the history, mm-hmm. and say, okay, let's just look at each one of those. If we're going to do maybe 6 in an academic year over each half term, let's look at each one and let's draw out an aspect of that bit of learning that we think starts to bring it to life, that gives it a local relevance to our children. And it may be that through that process, and just to sit in year groups and look at, or, over a phase, and to say, let's work together and identify some of these sustainability issues, some of these adaptation issues, some of these issues that we're going to need to be addressing into our future. And let's make one of our lessons in that half term relevant to that. So we then move from seeing the environmental agenda as something that an eco club deals with and has specific events for, to something that all the children are involved with. And if you build that half term by half term, year by year, you start to have this really strong sense of what does it mean to live in harmony with our world, sustainably, and so on. And I think it's really about doing that, just to step back and say, all right, let's just put out our planning documents and let's pull out one aspect that we think would be really good to address. It may already be there, but potentially it could be there even more. And we've talked about this golden thread of learning. I think for me, that's what it needs to be. One other thing that we would say in the Harmony Project is that the model for the best way to live, the most sustainable, healthy way to live, is nature. So we would say, if you want to go a little bit deeper than that, take a principle of harmony, a principle of nature, and use that to guide a way of learning through your school. So if I give you a simple example, nature is cyclical. So we know in our curriculum, we're going to cover off lots of different cycles, from plant life cycles, animals, water cycles, solar system cycles, and so on. So you could, as a school, and in fact, I had said this to me the other day, literally the week before last, I'm going to take one of your principles and run it through my curriculum. So every year group will do something probably around cycles. So let's build that message into our school. They can do it in whichever half term is the most appropriate for that cycle. So you're not going to plant seeds in late November, early December, but you will do in springtime. And then the questions are very simple. What did you learn from this project and the cycle message? And what does cycle mean? Why does nature work in cycles? And of course, children will say things like, because cycles never end. And then that draws out a message that if you want something to be sustainable, it has to be cyclical. So those principles, cycles, diversity in us, in nature, interdependence, systems thinking, in effect, how things work together. They're really lovely ways to just thread the learning through the year groups and draw out that sustainability message.
There's a key part that I heard you say there, which I think, I mean, certainly again, I know we talk a lot, so principle-led curriculum design. So what are the basic principles? Because that's the simplicity of it, really, isn't it? So what are the principles that we are trying to communicate, we're trying to embed, we're trying to instill in our young people? So that's really helpful. And so, you know, people that are getting, I talk to lots of leaders that say, you know, we've been tutored in this kind of siloed thinking. You know, I've specialized in my area and I don't touch anything else. I often say here, you know, I'm still challenged every time a school leader says to me, I don't do numbers, don't give me spreadsheets, I don't do numbers. And I often say to them, well, you wouldn't dream of saying to me, I don't do words. So there's a problem here in terms of how we value all of these things. But if we start with principles, we want every child to be able to speak lucidly and clearly and explain themselves and communicate. We want children to be literate, to read and to write and to gather and communicate. We want people to be numerate so that they're using numbers, because that is the base of we want nature to be understood. We want cycles. So you start with these principles. That's a great way to build your curriculum journey. I think that particularly with our national curriculum has got lost in the narrative. We've got very close to these sort of silos of thinking.
I completely agree. And you're right with this word silo. It's interesting. I think we maybe need to explore it a little bit more deeply, because when you silo learning, you create disconnect. You do the opposite of what we're discussing here, which is a joined up way of understanding the world, a coherent way of understanding the world. And I actually feel for children that they can go from one lesson to the next and it's siloed. And to be honest, it's pretty random. And they must be thinking, gosh, we've just done this in this lesson and now we're doing that. And it's a bit of a head spin. So when we join learning together in meaningful ways around a project, an inquiry, a particular theme, it's a really lovely, you could almost feel like you're relaxing into it. And suddenly there's a sigh of relief that, oh, okay, it's all making sense now. And that's great. So I do think I touched on it earlier, but I do think it's just a smarter way to learn. And for a teacher, it's easier. And, you talked about silos. We've talked about schemes. Schemes are fine to an extent, but they will dictate what you do. And then you go into your scheme for different subjects. And usually, there are curriculums out there which will be more joined up, but often they're not. So, yeah, I think it's something that I hope the new curriculum will start to encourage more, this interconnectivity that we're discussing.
And I know in our conversation previously, so I know you focused on primary, and so much, and I think that really is important, because this is about laying foundations of learning for future learning. And I don't just mean, actually, Ger Grass was here. Professor Ger Grass we spoke to recently, and he said, lifelong learning starts at 2. Well, actually, I think it starts in the womb, but that's we can debate those 2 years. Lifelong learning starts when we begin, and that learning discipline should be all the way through, and that's about investment in younger learning. I just thought there was a comment you made about, we've talked about different types of curriculum, and from Smart Curriculum's point of view, we're involved in what's going on around the world. IB are changing. They're putting in an interconnected curriculum at level 3, at A-level equivalent. So they're not looking, and I don't think IB has ever been particularly siloed. They've always looked at the theory of knowledge and the way that learning fits together. But they're actively working on this new qualification that is transformative, and it's going to include sustainability, and it's that bigger. Any comment on that, Richard? Because people are getting the message, aren't they?
Very much. And interestingly, the Director General of the IB, his name is, as you will know, Olli-Pekka Heinonen. He was the former minister, or he was the Minister of Education for Finland. And exactly as you've just outlined it, he and the IB team are very clear that they want to offer this, I think they call it Systems Transformation Pathway course. As you've said, it's A-level equivalent. So it's very much at that level, that age. And I suppose one of our exciting challenges is how we can build those experiences and that way of learning from the early years right through to IB A-level equivalent, and then on into the world. Because really what we need to do is create an education system that prepares our young people, not just with the knowledge and skills, but with the means to apply that into whatever context they are working in or living in. So that's the energy I think that we're starting to feel around where we need to go. And of course, it's a change, and change is not easy, and it needs work. But I think if we're smart with it, we can do it relatively quickly. And I think it's where we need to support each other. I think we need to see how different schools, we've on this conversation highlighted schools doing lovely things. We need to learn from each other in that process. Give ourselves space. I think education needs a bit more space for people to try things out, to be creative in what they want to do. There's a lovely word in Welsh called cnefin, and it means a sense of place or rootedness. So in Wales, the main focus for their curriculum is to make it relevant to those children where they live, whether it's in a city or in a little village in the countryside, and to draw out the learning from that place. And I think if we can give schools a bit more space to do that, then the learning will just feel better. It'll feel kind of more authentic, I think.
There's such power in that, and I in fact I've just written a piece on place-based curriculum, and I know there's this whole idea of Andy Burnham is now Prime Minister, and their thoughts of moving forward and what's gone on in Manchester. I don't particularly like the Manchesterism kind of terminology around it, but this idea, we've been talking about regional curriculum and regional relevance, and it's that interconnectedness and children being able to see how their learning is going to impact their community, whether that's in farming or whether that's in industry or whether that's in city, wherever it is. They need to see that their learning has some place. So place-based curriculum is a powerful understanding that we really need to kind of release. I wanted to ask you about, because you told me about something that you've been doing in Zimbabwe, I think it was, just this whole idea of innovation projects, and to tell us a bit about that program that you were working in Africa.
Well, one of the things that I think we need the humility to do is to learn from others and to see what they're doing, and not assume that what we're doing is the right thing. I mean, we are questioning it right now. But going to Zimbabwe, as I did a couple of months ago, was such an enlightening experience. And I would go further and just say it was really joyful. The young people there, and I went to a number of schools, were just fantastic. They were so articulate, so passionate. They seemed really inspired by what they were doing, and they were very good at explaining it and sharing their work. So they have a really great curriculum, and they call it a heritage curriculum. So there are 3 elements to it, and we've touched on them today. The first is obviously the core skills. They need to have those, and they have fantastic results overall in those areas. So they're very secure, and it means they come across really well. They have that confidence in those foundational skills. But the second element then is the heritage. So their learning is rooted in their tradition, in their cultures, plural, and in their place. So they learn about traditional skills, they learn their history, and it's very much their indigenous history and their rootedness. And they have some of their learning, and I saw it, it was wonderful. They have some of their learning with their elders. So their elders talk to them about a way of life, and the boys and the girls speak with them and respond. You know, the elders will speak to them and tell them things, and then they have to come back with an understanding of what they're saying and articulating that in their own world. So it builds a really strong sense of intergenerational learning and community, and you just really feel that they are very together, and it's a very safe place, Zimbabwe. You know, if you were in South Africa and you were in a city, you probably wouldn't go out at night walking the streets. You would be very wary of doing that. Whereas in Zimbabwe, they said, you know, if we had something terrible happen, it would be headline news for weeks because it just doesn't happen. And really everyone I met, in whatever role they were playing, they were just delightful. So that's the second element, the heritage, the sense of community, their tradition, their past, their culture. And then the third element, your reference to innovation, is they then think about their future. So the other half of that is the looking back and now looking forward to say, okay, how do we want to improve our future? What are the things that we want to do? And they can be very diverse in that. So they can take particular themes, particular areas that they want to change. And they have pretty well in all schools now, I think, I didn't see that many, but they have what are called school business units. And they are food growing projects, but they're not a raised bed. They are extensive food growing projects where they grow so much food that they can sell it into their community. They can feed it into their kitchens. It was quite extraordinary. They have space. And of course, we would be challenged in many schools with lack of space, but they were growing just the most incredible amount of produce and feeding that into their community. So they were making big sort of bowls or baskets of fruit and veg that they would sell to families in their local area. So it's a lovely mix of things, and it feels like they've got a great balance between those different areas of learning.
That's notable. It's staggering. I'm thinking of the schools that I visited, you know, Bedfordshire, Norfolk, Suffolk, where schools that had farms, that, you know, the school farm as we knew. I mean, the first school I taught in, we had a farm, we had a cow, we had goats, we had sheep. All of that's gone. There's, you know, agriculture was removed from the curriculum. I know that some of those schools in Bedfordshire where they had school farms, they're just flat fields now. They were flat, you know, ploughed flat. And I know at the time I was there, I was working with the leaders and saying that you can't lose this legacy. You've got to keep it going. You may not be able to run it in the way that it used to be run, but let's keep it, because it will come back. There is a cycle here, and we're going to need to. And I guess that's centre here. But it's great to hear of. I know we've championed here some, you know, indigenous wisdom. You know, a year ago we were talking to some tribes, just looking at how they communicate their wisdom through the tribe, exactly as you were saying, you know. So the tribal leaders talking to the children and setting them goals and working with them, and how their work is going to feed back into the community, and how that's sustainability. That's the cycle of life. You know, you're the leaders of the future. So how are you going to learn that? Well, learn from us, because we learn from our heritage. So it's really powerful stuff, isn't it? And we, in a sense, in our modern world, we've lost some of that, and certainly the curriculum is not richer because of that.
Yes, it's very much the case, and I'm quite excited by where this could go, because as we see the digital world and AI taking over certain aspects of our lives, I think we're going to go back to nature more. I think we're going to become more practical. I think that's where a lot of our skills will be applied. And of course, not for everyone, but I think the shift will be more towards that. And you're right, agriculture, our land here is 70% agriculture. There are so many conversations going on now about how we become more regenerative, how we create more rotational farming systems, of course, in the context of the climate and where that is changing and how we can adapt to that. And, the work we're doing with Beacon Farms, with the Sustainable Food Trust, is very much trying to ensure that our children are connected to areas, even if they're in a city, somewhere within an hour's drive. And yes, you've got to manage the transport issues around that, but there's some good thinking on that. But then you get children onto the land and really understanding that. And whether it's a pot or a raised bed in your school, or whether it's actually going out into a landscape nearby, to understand that it's a good thing. So these farms are becoming, in effect, education platforms. And I think what this is doing more generally, and I think where schools can really see opportunities, is to look beyond and to start working much more as a community, and to find the right people who can either come into school or you can go and see and really build that learning together. So, as an example, we've always got allotment growers locally. It doesn't matter where you are, there'll always be allotment growers. And they are great teachers of food grain. So let's find the right people. Of course, you need to do safeguarding checks and so on, but find the right people who can really add value to that. So, I suppose it needs an outward facing look, perspective. And then really identifying, we would call them partners in learning, but the people who can really add value to what we do.
So I'm going to put your contact details are here. So richard@theharmonyproject.org.uk. So if anyone is listening, either wants to get involved or is a partner that might have a facility that would be useful to a school, please do reach out to Richard richard@theharmonyproject.org.uk. This is really important stuff. This is really, the future of the educating learners is kind of in the balance. There are things that are happening, and we want to see these opportunities taken. So if you are able to get involved, or you're interested in supporting what Richard is doing with the Harmony Project, then please do get in touch with him. Just Richard, again, one of the things that we're working on together in September, I'm going to leave that ticking on the bottom there. We're speaking at a conference with Anthony Willoughby and others at Shireland School in September, really looking at relevance. I mean, the topic is relevance and how creative curriculum is becoming relevant, and they're using the Depoto methodology, the territory mapping. How did you get involved in that, and what are your goals for the conference as it comes up?
I was introduced to Anthony through a mutual friend, and so we have not met face to face yet, but we've had lots of correspondence. And I think your word relevance is absolutely the key. And it's a very simple question to ask, but an important one to ask as a school community. What is relevant for our young people today? And a lot of people will probably say our curriculum is not relevant enough now, and we need to rethink it. And we need to look at how we balance learning from the past in some of those history areas, although I would question whether some of them are actually really the right ones to be learning about. I think we could be, again, more localized. But then how we take that into the future. There is a group of young people, secondary age, they call themselves Teach the Future. And interestingly, their view was, we are too backward looking and we need to look ahead. We need to start identifying what our future might be like, could be like, and let's start to get a better balance between the learning from the past or in the past and learning for the future. So I think this relevance word, and I'm sure this conference, this event, will be around what are we learning for, what's the purpose, and also this sense of the human element. What does it mean to be human? How do we flourish as human beings? When do we feel most fulfilled in what we do? And usually it is about making our learning relevant to our world. Feeling that we have a role. And one other word to add into that, which we've kind of referenced but maybe not been explicit about, is this word of leadership. And we know that young people are probably most fulfilled when it's their story, their message, their sharing of their work. So if we can give them that leadership responsibility and opportunity, then they will love that learning and they'll take it on for us. I mean, they're amazing. We have so many amazing young minds out there who want to do great things. So it feels like it's a bit almost like the floodgates opening, isn't it? It's about opening those gates and allowing that to flow and guiding it and challenging it sometimes and feeding new pieces of understanding into it, but really giving them more autonomy around what they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that's the joy of teaching, isn't it? To speak of the profession, that you have the opportunity to see groups of young minds in the future that they hold, and change and challenge and all of the things that they bring. My work in creativity, because that's what I used to teach. They can be the most imaginative people and come up with some amazing ideas. As Ken Robinson used to say, excuse me, we're very good at teaching creativity out of children, but that's a whole nother subject. So, Richard, my kind of last question of all of my guests is, if you could change one thing within the system, in your perspective, what would be the most impactful, or the one thing that you would like to see? If you could change one thing, what would it be?
Well, I think it draws together all the areas that we've been talking about today. I think we need learning to be much more interconnected, joined up, relevant, meaningful, nature connected, and of its place. And I think if the curriculum can give space for that and allow teachers to be real teachers, to really create things and craft things and work things that have a local context. And that does need time and space. It needs time to allow it to grow and embed itself. If we do that, I think the energy will change. Like we're saying with young people being given the reins and given leadership responsibilities around things. I think if we can do that for our teachers as well and our school leaders, they will flourish too. And that's what we need for all the different stakeholders in this conversation. So yes, if we can do that and build that new message into learning, I think we're going to move into a really good place. Brilliant.
Richard, I'm very grateful for the conversation this morning. Thank you for the places that you've taken us, and the Harmony Project. I wish you great success, and we'll keep our conversation going outside of this broadcast. But thank you. And then obviously the 21st of September, the Future of Education conference we're doing with Sir Mark Grundy at Shylands, and a number of guests that are there. But please come and or at least engage with it. I don't know whether there are places left at the conference, but it will be videoed and people will be able to see that. But the conversations will be very much touching the things that we've been talking about this morning. Richard, I'm very grateful. Thank you very much for being here. And we'll engage again on this deep subject.
Thank you, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you today. And as you say, we have further conversations to have, and I really look forward to keeping in touch and to building the message of what we've just shared.
Absolutely. Well, stay with me for a second. I'm just going to do the last part. Now, just in the tone of all that we've done, I've just a few things to share. Please, if you are watching on any of the social media platforms, please like, follow, share, subscribe. Get involved in the conversation, because it's really important to us that you are having your say and your inputting to this conversation. We've got some really interesting guests coming up over the next months. Like Richard, I have much to say on subjects related to curriculum design. So please get involved when you can. I will just say too, you've seen, and I've talked about the books over some time. August, The Efficient School is coming out as a book. The Perfect Timetable is there. Many of the things that we've talked about this morning, so things like purpose driven curriculum, so finding your purpose. These are not books that are about the mechanics and the maths. These are the values and the truths behind how we put schools together. So many people saying we haven't got enough money, we can't do that deficit mindset. Well, the Efficient School helps you to see how it's possible to do it with the funding that you have. So please, if you are able to, use the QR code in the top right hand side of the screen. It will take you to their website, and you can get copies of those books from Amazon or wherever you buy your books. Thanks for that. I really appreciate you being here. So thank you for joining us for Friday Focus. We will see you in our next episode. Please do just join the conversation.